I think we've been given the green light to kick off.
I think we have. So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I can already see delegates on the chat from all over the world. So thanks so much for joining us for this virtual roundtable brought to you by Voxbone. Well, we'll be looking at the topic of whether this year 2020 is going to act as a turning point for the communications industry. My name's Patrick Watson. I'm a senior analyst, research analyst with the Cavell Group. And I'm broadcasting today from my living room, but we've managed to pull together a really spectacular panel of guests to go through the topic today. So I'm just going to go around and do introductions across the panel. So firstly, we've got Paul McGuinness, who's Senior Solutions Architect for Megaport. So Paul, firstly, how are you this afternoon? And could you give us a little bit of an introduction to what it is you do at Megaport?
Yeah, all good. Thanks, Patrick. Again, yeah, all working from home as well. Yeah, I'm Senior Solution Architect with Megaport based out of the London office. Megaport offers a global software-defined network. We're in over 550 data centers around the world, and we allow our customers to connect privately from data center to data center or into the cloud in an easy way, all driven through a portal. We've also got a cloud router that allows you to do cloud-to-cloud connectivity and hybrid connectivity. So that's me.
Excellent, thanks, Paul. I'm also Mehmet Hussein, Technical Design Authority. I love the title from Voxbone. How are you doing this afternoon, Mehmet?
I'm quite all right. The title is more poncy than it seems. What I really am is I do the pre-sales at Voxbone. For those of you that don't know, Voxbone is an international SIP provider with the capability to provide PSTN replacement services in 34 countries around the world, covering 93% of the GDP markets around the world. Great.
And from Audiocodes, we've got Technical Marketing Manager for the EMEA, Jason Wyatt. Jason, how are you this afternoon? How's lockdown treating you?
I'm very well, thank you. And lockdown, I mean, for me, I've been locked down pretty much since the beginning of February. So all events were cancelled in February. So I've been here quite a while. It's Audiocodes. I mean, most people on this call probably have heard of Audiocodes. We do everything there is to do with enabling voice for a whole host of platforms: Zoom, Teams, Amazon Chime, ranging from physical virtual boxes for session border controllers, analog gateways, through to some of our great management solutions, and of course our latest AI technology that we've got with Meeting Insights and Voxbone. So a whole sort of plethora of products that we've got available for enhancing your experience with voice.
Great. And in this time of lockdown, conferencing is ever so important. So last but not least, founder and CEO at Meetupcall, Simon Moxon. How are you doing, Simon?
I'm good, thanks, Patrick. Coping.
And what if you could just give us a little brief overview of what it is you do at Meetupcall?
So I'm the founder and CEO here at Meetupcall. This is a company I started as an audio conference call provider 10 years ago. We now provide audio and video conference services, and we have a focus on user experience, commitment to privacy, and delivering a white glove service.
Excellent. Well, so the topic today of whether 2020 is going to act as a turning point for the communications industry, I've put together some questions for the panelists, but we're also really keen, if you've got any questions in the audience as delegates, you can either submit them in the question section of the webinar, and those will come through to me, or you can get involved on social media, on LinkedIn or Twitter, and use the hashtag Voxbone Roundtable, and those will come through to the team. We'll try and get the questions dispersed to the panelists as well as possible. So let's get underway. I think it's been a strange year so far. At Cavell Group, we do research for the industry and try and understand what's going on in terms of communication trends. And we conducted a study quite recently on the impact of COVID-19, and there were lots of results you'd expect: a big boom in the uptake of cloud services, a big rise in the use of video services as well, which I think we've seen quite widely within the industry. But there were some more subtle things in terms of not a massive rise in the use of voice traffic. So I'm interested from each of you panelists, with your particular insight within your businesses and your customers, if you've witnessed any interesting trends that have been brought about by the crisis that we're in at the moment. So Simon, I know that business has gone a bit crazy for you guys. So do you want to take that first? Are there any interesting trends that you might not have been expecting?
Yeah, I'm surprised at the results that you've seen. They don't necessarily correlate to what we've seen. So although we provide both video and audio conferencing, our video product was released into beta around the time this crisis started. So although we've seen high demand for the beta program, we don't have the historical data to compare against. But we have been providing audio conference services for 10 years, so we have lots of data on that. And we saw a significant rise in voice traffic, so it's not gone away just yet. To give you an idea, on, I guess it would be Friday, the 13th of March, voice traffic for us was up 40% on a typical Friday. The weekend was quiet, as normal. Saturday and Sunday tend to be quiet for us. By the following Monday, our voice traffic had jumped another 350%. And it remained that way for the next 2 weeks. During this period, I think we saw a lot of town hall type calls, 100+ participants on a call. You would assume this is organizations kind of managing the crisis internally themselves. So maybe some of that traffic was driven more by the nature of the crisis than perhaps a shift to working from home. But in the last probably 4 to 6 weeks, our traffic has remained over 2 times what it was pre-corona. And from a new inquiry standpoint, the week commencing the 15th of March, we had 5 times the new inquiries than we would in a typical week. So I think we're still seeing high demand for the voice product. But on the flip side, from an internal point of view, from a Meetupcall point of view, the way we're working, we are now using video for 95% of our communications during this time.
Yeah, and why wouldn't you when you have such a spectacular, fun-looking virtual background as well with a port table? I'll be using it constantly. Mehmet, I'm interested in your perspective of this, because obviously Voxbone facilitate a lot of the back-end infrastructure for communications providers. What are the particular trends that you've highlighted during this?
In short, we saw exponential growth across the board. In every market where we operate, every country that we sell any level of capacity in, we saw demand skyrocket to the extent where we got to the point where we were selling out left, right, and center. And it was in demand quicker than we could get it from the countries in question. We've even seen a massive demand from other carriers asking us for coverage in certain areas. Now, this might be because they're using more legacy technology and they're unable to scale as quickly directly, but the demand has been insane across the board in every country, pretty much following the spread of the virus across the world. We've seen the increase across the board. And from a company perspective, we went into lockdown, so to speak, quite early on. We've been, I think it's 6 or 7 weeks now, working, the whole company working from home across the board. Myself, I've been here a little bit longer. Being a new parent, I went straight from paternity leave straight into lockdown. So it's all a bit weird for me, but it's an interesting trend, right? There's massive demand in every market for capacity.
Yeah, and Paul, from your perspective, from your customers, what particularly interesting demands or any unique features have you been seeing?
Yeah, it's a little bit different for us because we're not, directly or 100% involved in the communication side around voice or video messaging. So, we deal with all sorts of corporate traffic, and it's a mix of everything across the board. So we're not seeing the major spikes that other companies have seen, although we have seen new peaks towards the end of March, and we've seen those new traffic peaks being sustained over since that period. So even though people are working from home and a lot of that traffic would not be directly going across us, we've still seen the corporate traffic at a very high level. So that has been quite interesting. But we also own and operate internet exchanges, and that's where we would have more of a touch point with media and entertainment traffic, but also with that traffic that's going to mobile office working like Google G Suite or Office 365. And we've seen new peaks on the internet exchanges as well around the world.
Yeah, I suppose these cloud services are going to be massive in enabling this shift we've seen from work from home. Jason, Audiocodes, again, obviously, Audiocodes, as you were talking about before, enable a lot of the mainly telephony features and additional features that we were talking about in something like Microsoft Teams, which has absolutely boomed because of this crisis. What areas have you been particularly tracking?
So, I mean, you know, we have, like everybody else, and I can cover what Simon says, when we've seen an increase in voice requirements over the last couple of months, most definitely. You know, I also saw the social media post that Cavell did, and I saw actually that the statistics were brought from the service provider industry, and obviously, you know, a lot of our customers are those service providers. And it's quite interesting that they sort of, you know, it's been pointed out that video, you know, is much greater than voice. I mean, I think, are those numbers being skewed because people are using Teams and Zoom, and there's a lot more peer-to-peer calls going on, so they're not actually seeing the true number of voice calls that are being made? It's kind of an open sort of question, I think. Obviously, you know, video has become a lot more popular, I think, over the last couple of months. I mean, you know, you're seeing it used widely on TV and wherever, you know, with politicians and everything. So, you know, it's naturally going to be used a lot more, and, you know, families are keeping in touch. But I think, like Simon says, voice is still very much there. People are still using voice and using the platforms and mechanisms they've got to communicate.
There's a really interesting piece around the premise of working from home, and effectively, I'm not sure if you guys will agree with this, the technology has been there quite a while. I've been working from home for quite a while, but it appeared that there was some sort of cultural blockage within certain businesses, and obviously certain businesses aren't suitable for work from home. So I'm interested to find out from you guys, but also we'll put a poll to the audience as well about, in terms of what are the biggest distractions that you've encountered from working whilst working from home. But to you guys more specifically, what are businesses what obstacles are they having to overcome when they're trying to enable work from home? And Mehmet, we can start with you on this, and you can obviously personally use newborn baby as one of the distractions, but I'm interested to hear what you think businesses are having to overcome more generally.
So, I mean, the newborn baby is actually a very, very little distraction. I mean, she's only about this big, but she's quite quiet and she keeps to herself. So that's not really high up on the list of distractions for me. For me personally, it's the blend between where the day starts and the day stops. So I'm quite used to working from home. Voxbone have got the remote working culture already ingrained, but that every single day waking up, turning on, working from home, given that we do business across borders, across the globe, you're always tempted to say, well, I can't go outside, I can't go out to eat, I can't go see family, I can't do anything else except sit here in this house. There's only so much Tiger King you can watch before you start going insane. So you end up trying to interface with people who are intelligent rather than people that want to kill tigers. And so you end up working at all kinds of crazy hours. In terms of what I've seen for companies adopting the working from home culture, there's two camps, right? There are those that know that it's possible and can see the benefit in doing it, and there are those that were never believers in the first place. Those that believe it was possible thought, okay, fine, it's easy. We'll either turn up whatever licensing we've already got, or go out and get some more licensing, no problem at all. The ones that were against it all along, they started shipping PCs to people's houses, not laptops, full desktop PCs to people's houses with no guidance around how to get it working, no webcam, no headset. So case in point, my sister, her husband works for an architecture firm. They shipped his PC to his house with no monitor, no cables, no webcam, no headset, and no real instruction on how to actually get going. They just said, get working. And there's this general scrabbling to get going in this whole echelon of society that thinks that people working from home are dossing about, not actually working. But in actuality, we've seen a massive increase in productivity across the board for people working at home because they're able to just concentrate on what they're doing.
Yeah, and I suppose that's not even a technical thing at all. It's just a planning and management thing. So Jason, from Audio, would you agree with that? Is that the biggest hurdle that businesses have to overcome, or is there something else that you've been hearing?
No, I do agree with Mehmet. And you know, again, I've been working from home for the last decade, and it's just getting into the kind of swings and roundabouts thing, I think. And as long as the swings are in the favour of the company, you do end up sort of working at 7 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock at night. But then during the day, you might need to go and do something else. I think you do have an increase in productivity because you are aware that you need to put the hours in and be productive and show that you are actually working when you are at home. You know, it's reducing traffic. It's you know, better off on the environment. We've seen that with a number of news posts that have been out over the last couple of weeks, couple of months. You know, and I just hope that a lot more companies do embrace this post COVID and actually do allow a lot more of their workforce to work from home, because I don't think there's any need for people to be stuck in offices and, you know, traveling halfway around, you know, the globe for meetings and things, when, you know, a lot of it can be done using the tools that are right in front of them and the tools that we've become dependent on over the last month or so.
But I suppose that's potentially a bit of a philosophical twist required within businesses, of more of an outcome-based role rather than, you know, necessarily you come in the office, you sit there for the designated amount of minutes. I mean, personally, I think I was probably less productive in the office than I am at home, wandering off to the water cooler or wasting time in the kitchen.
Yeah, I mean, it's a cultural change, most definitely. And I have spoken to a lot of business owners like, no, I've got to have people in the office. They've got to be at their desk. I want to know where they are, what they're doing. And is that the best way to manage people if they've got to commute an hour and a half each way each day? And it's you know, obviously, you know, it's great to go into an office and to have the camaraderie of, you know, actually seeing people and seeing the whites of their eyes. But, you know, I think you can be far more productive when you are working from home.
And Paul, what about from Megaport? What have you been helping customers with, or what are you hearing as feedback from them in terms of this transition?
Yeah, just to add what Jason was saying there, I think, you know, employers are going to have to trust their employees to do their work and to be, you know, more independent while they work from home. But what we've been seeing as we talk to, you know, mostly the tech leaders or the network providers inside larger corporations, initially they were basically just on a major scramble to get remote workers enabled. So a lot of those companies did have remote working capabilities, but they never were designed to scale up to what they had to provide. So they spent a lot of time working on VPNs, working on getting their security policies right, making sure that all of their employees could access cloud-based applications. And then they're worried about private connectivity and how that affected them as well. You know, from a personal point of view, I used to work in video quite a few years ago, but you know, we're quite lucky these days that we can scale with the video platforms that we have today, and they can be scaled up and down on compute and networks that we have. If you look back about, you know, 12 to 15 years ago, most of the video conferencing that larger enterprises used were hardware-based platforms, and they didn't scale very well, and you had to plan more in advance. So we're pretty lucky this is happening around now, if you can call it that.
It's an interesting point you make about the security as well, because as you said, initially there was sort of an immediate dash to try and grab solutions that could facilitate this work from home. But in the last couple of weeks, definitely there's been a heightened focus on the security and compliance elements that might not have been so considered initially. Simon, obviously you've been facilitating this, and you talked about your own the internal transition to using more video. What have you seen from customers in terms of barriers that have to be, obstacles that have to be circumvented for this?
I think, and I'd agree with all the points that have been said so far. Internally for us, I think the majority of the challenges have been environmental. In particular, finding a quiet space to make calls or to concentrate. Whether these are work from home problems or lockdown problems, I'm not quite sure at this point, but certainly if you've got two people both trying to work from home from the kitchen table, that presents a challenge. And if you have young children who are not at school, even more so. Internet connection issues, definitely something that I've been thankful. I've had a good connection for a while now, and I think you forget that everybody's not in that position. And so even internally with our team, some of our technical team have internet connections that are not quite where they need to be for a permanent working from home strategy.
That's an interesting point, actually. And Mehmet, I'd like to bring you into that in terms of, geographically, I mean, the UK generally has relatively good provision of connectivity solutions, but I assume that varies globally. And then again, as to Simon's point, the capability of work from home solutions massively relies on the connectivity you're able to leverage.
It varies massively, right? So in all corners of the world, you'll have everybody at home now, and you'll have the people who are earning the money in the household trying to do things like this, using collaboration tools, consuming bandwidth. And in another room in the house, or maybe even in the same room, they'll have their kid watching Netflix or Disney or whatever in 4K, streaming something, chewing up all the bandwidth. And it will just take it completely non-discriminately. In some countries like the UK, I haven't got anything special, but my wife can sit next door watching Netflix and it doesn't really impact what's going on here. It might be because I've segregated some bandwidth away from me so that she can't touch it. But in other countries, bandwidth isn't as easy to come by. So I think that's why we've seen such a spike in the demand for physical dial-in capacity for voice communications, because people are finding that when they're trying to join their calls with their colleagues, it's not working perfectly well because the infrastructure in these countries was never designed for this. It was never designed for everybody to be running everything to do with their lives all at the same time, 24/7 on a residential broadband connection with the whole street doing the same thing. Contention is going mad.
Yeah, it is interesting that, and obviously the infrastructure and the government planning is going to take some there, especially, and we'll come on to this a bit more later about whether this is going to be a more permanent change. But I'm interested in particular as well about software platforms and provision and applications that people are using during this process. So we'll put another poll up here about the whether you rate the use of your quality conferencing either at home or in the office. We'll put a poll up. But for the panelists, what particular, Mehmet, you mentioned the rise in adoption of collaboration services, and obviously Simon, you were talking about still the requirement for voice conferencing. So who do you think's done particularly well out of this? Obviously, we're on a Zoom webinar at the moment. Zoom seems to have exploded in popularity. I think they announced 300 million users. Microsoft Teams recently announced 12 million additional Teams users in a week, taking them to 44 million. And we've seen, as you were saying, a rise in demand for all of these solutions. So do you think are any particular areas that are particularly helpful to businesses during this, or is it just any solution that can enable more effective communication and collaboration from a disparate workforce? And Paul, you can take that first if you like.
Yeah, I think things are going to change around the way people license their software. When you think about it right now, there's probably a ton of licensed software that's office focused that people just can't use right now. And then on the other side, people have had to switch on a lot more licensing for remote software that they have to use right now. So people will want flexibility in the future around what they buy and about how they license that as well. There's no doubt in a few years' time, people who do need to be in the office, they can't afford to just be paying for remote working software all of the time when they don't need it. So there's a bit of flexibility there. But people will also want to be able to remotely manage their solutions. That might mean pushing things more to the cloud or just having more of a cloud focus on the tooling and the way that you interface with the different packages that you use. And then certainly I think there'll be a transformation around the digital transformation projects that are going on. Maybe that's been going on for some time for a lot of companies, but maybe it's been languishing a little bit, and we'll need a repurposing and a refocus based on what we're going through today.
And Simon, obviously you were talking about a 5 times increase in demand for Meetupcall service. Have you been having any specific requests about other solutions that businesses are wanting to use either in an integrated fashion or alongside yours?
I don't think we've had any direct requests, but one thing where this has been useful for us is that we've become power users of our own product. So you can start to see things that work and things that don't work. And some of these tools that we're using can also be an interruption. I'm thinking instant message, these kind of things are almost a negative impact from a productivity point of view.
Yeah, I suppose it's a case of consolidating your workflow, but and I don't know about you. I mean, I before we started this webinar, we had to frantically go and silence 50 different applications that were potentially going to put in notifications at the same time. So there is definitely a case there for sort of consolidating that workflow down. Jason, from an audio, obviously you're a session border controller partner for Microsoft Teams. That's seen a huge boom. So I assume there's been a big demand there for additional telephony services into Teams.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we actually started developing a new product back in October last year called Audiocodes Live for Microsoft Teams. And it basically takes everything that we do at Audiocodes and wraps it into a fully managed service. And, you know, as soon as there was the outbreak of COVID-19, you know, the increase in requests for this new service has been phenomenal. I mean, it's almost got a little bit overwhelming, the amount of requests that we've had for, you know, us to look at and provide voice services to enable, you know, enterprise voice for Teams. But, you know, that's been the same with Zoom, and I think with you know, a lot of platforms. You know, and go back to one of your sort of earlier questions, I think, you know, businesses have fallen back to using whatever's out there to enable them to be able to do their jobs remotely. And, you know, I know I've had video calls with my daughter, and she works for a large corporate that doesn't have Teams or Zoom, and she was just using, you know, a known sort of social media app to video call. And she said all of her you know, colleagues are doing that. So I think you use what's available to you.
Yeah, but I suppose there again, there's the looming problem of shadow IT, which probably, although I don't have any data to back this up, it's just but has probably risen from this. The amount of people who might be using WhatsApp or, in fact, Facebook or any of those platforms that might not be certified by an enterprise might well be using them to communicate. Mehmet, you mentioned collaboration before. Any particular products or platforms that you think have been particularly beneficial to businesses?
I mean, it's really those that are in the collaboration space, and all of them are beneficial to businesses. There will be a particular focus when you're looking at enterprises on security, and I think one of our attendees has particularly mentioned that to us as panelists. There will be a requirement for those collaboration providers to demonstrate that their solution is secure, especially as you've got lots of people around the world in their homes on unknown broadband connection, sharing who knows what to who knows who over something. And the only thing that they can control is the something. So there should be a great inspection of what is the something that they're using. And back to your point about shadow IT, if you've got people just signing up for any old free something account on the internet and using that for their business critical communications, that's not a good situation to be in. Organizations not only need to get in front of this curve and dictate the right tools to be used that have been vetted properly, but also need to give the right amount of training to the people using them. Because it's all good, well and good putting something in front of someone, but if that person has been used to working behind a desk every day for 30 years and has never worked from home a day in their life, they're going to default to the thing that they used to speak, I'm guessing here, to their kids, which is going to be a Facebook Messenger or something like that. They won't necessarily be au fait with the latest and greatest and most secure communications packages.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting, especially collaboration, where it's these consolidated applications with lots of functions and features and available to a user. If you're not utilizing those in a way, effectively a lot of the solution's value is lost. So things like Microsoft Teams, Cisco WebEx Teams, Slack, if you're not able to use that realm of features, it's a bit of it's potentially a distraction, as Simon was saying before. In terms of the general work from home trend, I'm interested to hear from you guys. Is this going to be something that is, obviously it's been accelerated by this crisis, but are we going to see this continue? Are a lot of businesses effectively realizing, why have we been paying expensive rent on those office premises when effectively we're going to be able to work from home? I'm interested to see how that'll continue in the future. And also to the audience as well, what do you plan to do when this crisis is over? Do you want to go straight back to the office to get away from the kids and the dog, in my case? Or would you like to be working from home, or would you like a best of both worlds with the hybrid? So to the panelists, and Mehmet, we can start with you on this. What do you think is going to happen in the long run? Is this going to accelerate and amplify a trend towards a more general cultural shift to working from home?
I think it will be reflected in an exponential growth curve, which is what we're seeing now. A small dip whilst when people are allowed to go back to the office, and those that have not implemented something successfully and have had probably a bad experience, probably due to no training on the tools that they've been given, decide to go back to the office. And as the demand from the employees increases to enable them to properly work from home, once they've seen the benefits that can be had in saved commute time, we'll see a slow but steady trend upwards, but starting from way higher from where we were 2 months ago.
Yeah, I think that was reflected in the poll results we just got in, that, you know, the most people are looking for a best of both hybrid approach. Jason, from an Audiocodes perspective, obviously you've got a global presence as well. So do you think there are some cultural differences in work from home? For example, in the Far East, in Japan, there was a very work in the office culture, whereas maybe in the Western world, we were slightly more open to working from home. Do you think that's going to, those trends are going to extend, and we're going to see generally more work from home enablement?
Yeah, I think we will. I think this has been a bit of a wake-up call for a lot of organisations that haven't embraced digital transformation, haven't adopted technology that's allowed employees to work from home. I mean, you know, I've always said I'm quite fortunate. I work for Audiocodes. They're an Israeli-based company, globally, I think near sort of 800 employees. And I would say 2/3 of those all work from home. You know, we don't see that being a problem really across the globe anywhere. I mean, there is, like Mehmet said, there is connectivity issues to consider. You know, so if you don't have the connectivity, then you have to work, you know, you're almost forced to work from an office. But I think, you know, from a disaster recovery perspective, you know, this has been a bit of a wake-up call. And I think organisations that don't have or haven't put solutions in place are now taking stock. They're taking a breath, they're looking at it, and we're still getting these inquiries coming through. Even though we're week 5, week 6 down the road to a UK lock-in, we're still getting the inquiries coming in saying, okay, now, you know, we've managed to get by, but now we need to put something properly in place. We now need to look at, you know, how we can do this, you know, on a professional level. So I think there will be you know, an ethos of sort of working on the culture will change to that kind of working from home.
And Paul, do you agree with that? Do you think you'll see a more sort of permanent requirement for facilitation of these services?
Yeah, I certainly do. I've been working from home since the 1990s, you know, doing VPNs over dial-up, which was painful at the time. But I certainly believe it's going to be like what Mehmet said about users going back to the office and saying to their managers, you know, I effectively worked from home for this period of time. Why can't I do it at least part of the time in the future? So they're definitely going to be looking for that that hybrid approach. Plus, a lot of the tools that, you know, the cloud providers are using and the video conferencing providers are using around, you know, the access control, the management, security. Once companies start to understand and trust those tools and know how to use them properly, there'll be wider adoption that we'll see in the market. And then just finally, I saw something on the news recently about Tata Consulting Services COO, who said that they're seeing throughput and productivity being up and better collaboration. And he has no intention of telling his 400,000 plus workforce to stop working from home in the near future. And in fact, he wants to see more of it, more remote working.
I didn't see that, but that's particular. And I suppose a lot of it does come down to the bottom line, effectively. If you're more productive, or at least as productive as you had been, then it wouldn't seem any sense to move back. So, Simon, you talked about that sort of initial uptake in demand for yours. Do you expect that to continue as more and more businesses think, oh, well, we need to continue with this, and we need to continue to enable our users to conference with each other from home?
I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? If we assume that this COVID scenario is going to come to an end and organizations are going to have a choice, I guess it depends on whether they care how their employees feel. You know, will that be a driver for it? And is the experience that they've had in this lockdown scenario, is that a realistic experience of what work from home would be like? I'd imagine that stress levels are high because there's an invisible killer virus, that people can't go out. resources are limited, does those emotional feelings end up being associated with the idea of working from home?
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, you don't want that association to deter people from what it's like, really.
Yeah, I think that it may well be that for a large number of people, the experience of working from home could be tainted with the additional stresses of doing it under these circumstances. But it may well be, as you said, that if an organization can accept say a 10% productivity hit, but a 20% reduction in costs, then they may choose to take that. From a personal standpoint, I think there are definitely some tasks where you are more productive working from home. And I think what I would like to see is more organizations being flexible and allowing that mix of work from home, work from the office, with the employees making the decision of which is the most appropriate.
So I think we've got pretty much consensus there from the panel that we'd like to be able to enable this for long term, and it's likely that this is going to have accelerated work from home function. We talked briefly about the sort of connectivity and infrastructure earlier on. So do we have the capability and capacity long term within our infrastructure to be able to enable long term vast swathes of different countries? Paul, do you want to take that initially?
Yeah, when we looked at our network and, when things started to kick off for companies in March, it was actually not a great not a big story to tell, because all of the people who are using our network have the ability to control their own bandwidth. So they just can go into a portal, turn up and down their data rate, and then immediately they've got that problem sorted. So we allowed them to quickly solve their problems, and then they moved on to the other issues that they had about getting people working remotely. So that really came about because we've got a flexible network. We have to leave quite a large overhead on our network for additional capacity. So that was there, and then we saw this increase of about 15 to 20% of total traffic, and that didn't really cause us any issues. It's good to see the way the cloud providers did cordon off some of their capacity for things like Teams and things like G Suite, so that they could cope with the capacity that they needed there, and they could see that growing trend. But I think people will want this ability to be more flexible in themselves, have control over their own destiny without having to redesign everything that they have deployed within their current networks. So yeah, those are the kind of things that we see, that if people are self-sufficient, then it's less stress for them, more control, more flexibility.
And Jason, at Audiocodes, have you had to make any particular changes, or have you seen any particular strain on infrastructure within any capacity within your customers?
Well, I mean, we don't provide any sort of connectivity solution, so we can't. I can't really answer that fairly. I mean, certainly the capacity across all of our session border controllers, can be increased at any point. Especially when you've got something virtualized within Azure or AWS. So it's not really an issue. I mean, in fact, the devices are intelligent enough to increase the capacity as they need it. Obviously from a personal perspective, I was actually using 4G when we first had the lockdown, and it was very noticeable that the mobile networks were creaking. I mean, I was regularly getting lost connectivity, but that soon subsided. I would say after about a week, it kind of I think things kind of settled down, and I think it was that initial influx of people working from home, using mobile devices as their primary mechanism for communicating, and then businesses kind of catching up. I think by and large, I think even the Microsoft platform, the Teams platform, struggled in the early days. There was reported outages, there was reported, incorrect presence indicators and all sorts going on, where the platform was just trying to catch up with this unprecedented increase of 37 million daily users to 44 million daily users in 7 days. And let's be fair, that's actually quite phenomenal for a platform to be able to do that and flex that much in that short period.
Well, I suppose it's the benefit of these cloud, hyper flexible, elastic architectures that we've been talking about for all these years, finally coming back. So, and Simon, from your perspective, for for customers to be able to utilize your services? Do you think they're going to have to make any adjustments to enable work from home on sort of a more long-term basis?
I don't think so. I think that we've seen that the networks can cope, because they are doing now. As Jason said, I think the big challenge here was the sudden and immediate shift to work from home, and that actually now network operators have the data of what it looks like when everybody on the planet shifts to working remotely. We've got a high watermark of demand across these networks.
And Mehmet, from Voxbone's perspective, you probably get the best visibility of this in terms of this global infrastructure. Do you think it's there? It's got the scalability, it's got the capacity to enable a more general work from home trend all around the planet?
No, not from a telecoms perspective. The vast majority of countries are still running legacy TDM-based infrastructure where scalability is slow and rubbish, so to speak. What this will do is it will fast track the development of countries towards IP-based backbones. So in a country where you've got TDM, E1 interconnects, you're looking at weeks lead time to get increases of capacity, and that's crazy in a scenario like this. As is the case in Paul's network, you should just be able to say, right, we need more capacity, turn up the dial. We don't need the capacity anymore, turn it down a little bit. There should be that level of flexibility in the PSTN networks, and that just doesn't exist. And that's part of what we're trying to change, right? We're building our layer on top of what exists and unifying that experience to all of our customers, waiting for the countries to catch up and become IP enabled. And once they are, the consumption of those services would be much, much more seamless, because we effectively sold out in certain markets. The reason we sold out is because the countries couldn't give us the capacity quick enough because they ran out of physical boxes to plug us into. That's a crazy thing to happen in this day and age.
Yeah, for any, I mean, we talked about business planning, but that's more, you know, government planning that needs to have taken place well before. I mean, we could talk about government planning probably in a lot of this crisis, and probably should avoid that area. We've got a couple more questions, but I can see there's loads of questions that come through from the audience. So we'll just do sort of one final general question to the panel before we go into some of those audience questions. So I think we can all agree that whether we expected it or not, 2020 does appear to have been a real it is going to be a real turning point for the industry, and the COVID crisis appears to be some sort of catalyst for at least accelerated change into, like Mehmet was saying, IP-based, and Paul saying, and cloud-based services. What do you think this has changed the future over the next 5 years? I mean, at Cavell, we're currently trying to look at our forecasts in terms of cloud communications users, and I think you can probably imagine that that's not particularly easy off sort of 2 months change. So it's very difficult. But firstly, Jason, do you expect any? How's this affected the next few years, maybe for Audiocodes and some of your customers?
You know, I think it's accelerated adoption. Definitely, you know, the drum we've been banging for the last God knows how long, in terms of, you know, using products like Microsoft Teams, voice enabling product, voice enabling Zoom. You know, we've just made an announcement. We were now working with Google. We've just launched a solution with AWS. So, you know, I think it's accelerated the use of cloud voice solutions. And on the back of that, we're obviously going to, you know, we've got a whole host of other products which enhance the use and capabilities of those. So I think it's just it has accelerated, you know, these things for us, and I, you know.
Yeah, it's amplified everything. It's whether, I think what we're looking at as well in terms of our forecast is whether all of these users that have been added over the last couple of months are going to come away from what we were forecasting in 18 months, or whether that has added on additional capacity to accelerate.
And it'll be interesting to see if that still continues. It's still, you know, they still continue to use you know, the solution they're using at the moment, or whether that drops off, and whether it's like, oh well, you know, I'm going to go back to the office now, and I've got my desk phone. I don't need to use Zoom. I don't need to use Teams, or, you know. So it'd be interesting to see if it's just a short-lived, you know, solution to get over this, you know, where we are now, and then whether it's just, you know, normal business practice resumes.
Yeah, and one of the questions we were going to ask, but we didn't have time, is there's potentially going to be a recession caused by this. So how's that going to impact anything? Mehmet, what do you think the last few weeks and the crisis this year is going to have an impact on the sort of longer term future?
I mean, I kind of already answered that earlier on, but I think it is driving an exponential growth at the moment. There will, for some conferencing providers whose traditional model is B2B, and they've had a large influx of consumers picking up their products to use them for video calls with their significant others because they can't go and visit them, the majority of that will die off. Families will want to congregate together in the real. For example, I want to take my daughter to go and see my parents. We can't do that at the moment, so we're doing Zoom calls every weekend, whatever. That kind of traffic will die away. And what we'll be left with is the real growth that we saw in B2B communications. So I think there's some level of artificial inflation here, where the professional communication tools giving away free licenses have been picked up by the consumer and used for purposes that they were never intended. But on the flip side, we're seeing Facebook pivoting now, saying, oh, we're going to release a Zoom competitor, Facebook Meetings, to try and capitalize on this market. I think that's one step too late, too slow. They're late to the game, really. There's lots of people providing comparable services and lots of people providing better services.
Yeah, absolutely. And Simon, what do you think the impact is going to be of this over the next few years?
I think it's difficult to know. Obviously, we've had a number of discussions internally. I think our market just got a lot bigger, but the competitive landscape just got a lot more aggressive as well. We've had an increase in our customer base, but is that the next 12, 24 months worth of customers that we just got in the last 2 weeks? It could well be. We could have condensed 2 years worth of business into the last month. So I guess my answer to that question is, I really don't know. I think, is it a turning point? Yes. Which direction is it turning this stage? I'm not so sure.
No, but no prediction, not easy. And Paul, I suppose it's there is a certain amount of ambiguity there. But are there any things that you think we can be concrete about?
Yeah, well, I think companies are going to look at these sorts of readiness preparations in a different way as well. I think you'll see companies doing readiness days more often, maybe where, if they can work from home, they're going to, announce they're going to have a work from home day. We did it at Megaport earlier this year. And I think there'll be a rewriting of disaster recovery plans and how networks are going to deal with it, how people can remotely manage services, and maybe more of a push to the cloud for certain things. For example, if you needed to connect from the cloud into Voxbone, you could go through a cloud router in minutes, and that sort of thing has not traditionally been available, and it's still quite new, but people still have to grasp onto that and look at how they can use this new tech in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of factors that need to be taken into account. So we've got a few minutes left. We've had absolutely loads of questions for the audience. I'll try and get as many questions across to the panelists as possible in the next few minutes. Any that we don't cover, obviously we've got a list of them here, and you can get in touch on social as well using the hashtag Voxbone Roundtable, and we'll try and get the answers to those retrospectively as well. So a question here from the audience from Javier Pinzon, I believe. Do you see more specialized solutions or verticals for different features by industry? So, and he's put a couple of examples here. Education doesn't have the same needs, and lawyers and clients, but telemedicine, obviously there's big capacity for solutions there. And he'd love your opinions on particular industries and verticals that might be better suited to this sort of work from home, remote engagement, social distancing world. Does anyone want to take that first?
I'll go for something there. So this to me talks to the unbundling message that we've been pushing for the last year or so. The communications use case doesn't have to dictate what is being consumed. If you look at any telecoms use case, And if we're assuming voice communications here, because that's the world in which we, Voxbone, operate in, any voice communications use case will require connection to some PSTN network somewhere in the world, regardless of what it is. So I think we will see a specialization of the application offered to the end user, but it should be separated from the connection to whatever medium it is being delivered over, so that that person can consume whatever modules they want, wherever they want, whenever they want, and have the freedom to mix and match and procure their connection to whatever PSTN network they like under one roof. So they might have 6 or 7 different use cases in their organization, but actually they all boil down to something that needs connection to a carrier somewhere. They should be free to consume that and aggregate that and get a bulk purchase on that, whilst consuming the applications relative to the verticals that is relevant to them. I'd hope to see that change.
Yeah, Dad, I think that's something we have been seeing. Guys, anything else on the sort of verticalization piece? Any particular markets that you think?
I think as more and more kind of big corporations like Facebook, we've got Microsoft, we've got Google enter all this communication space for smaller service providers such as Meetupcall, finding other areas to add value is probably what we'll need to do. And you know, one way of doing that is specific solutions for the different verticals. So yeah, yes, I do think that that's the direction they will go.
There's another question here that's come up from a couple of different delegates as well, in terms of, obviously your pre-existing infrastructure, I hope I'm interpreting these right, will have affected your ability to enable work from home. And the example they bring up is VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure environment. So I suppose those were less suitable to an immediate shift to work from home, or Paul, I'm not sure if you'd have anything to add on that in terms of the capability of your pre-existing infrastructure.
Not specifically something that we would deal with directly too often, although customers would, you know, use our network for that type of communication while they're in the office. But no, I don't have too much to comment on that one.
And I suppose, Simon, the one thing on that is, and I don't know whether you'd know on this, it's in VDI environments, provisioning of conferencing services, especially video, has been challenging due to constraints there. I assume that would affect deployment in terms of if you have, especially in particular compliant scenarios, a big VDI environment, it might be quite difficult to suddenly enable them to work from home.
Yeah, it's not necessarily an area that I know too much about, but I do know that we have had customers using those kind of Citrix environments that have struggled to utilize video conference tools, for example. And I think having that fallback to the PSTN-based service does address that immediate need.
Yeah, we've had a question here from Jonathan Grant, and I think, Mehmet, you've already pre-answered this a bit, and he said the conversation assumes people have broadband and connectivity at home, which obviously all 5 of us panelists have been working at home for a while. There is, in countries with poor mobile service and broadband, what can the industry do to ensure that spectrum's available? Is there anything we can do to try and help that connectivity issue?
Quite simply, we can push the incumbents in the countries to transition towards IP-based telephony. It's as simple as that. Anything else is just silly, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that probably takes up to the time for the panel. I know there were some questions we didn't get round to, but what we'll do, we'll try and get those answered for you by the panelists, or try and get the best information possible to you and get in touch with you after the webinar. I just wanted to say a massive thanks, firstly, for all the delegates for coming on. We've had absolutely loads of questions that we didn't manage to get to there. So thanks for coming on and really engaging with us. But also to all the panelists, Mehmet, Paul, Jason and Simon, thank you so much for your time and explaining a little bit more about the COVID crisis and how it's impacting, and whether 2020 is going to act as this turning point for the cloud communications industry. Just time to say a big thanks from me as well. Don't forget to continue to get in touch with more questions, any feedback about the webinar as well, using on social media, using the hashtag Voxbone Roundtable. But for now, just thank you very much to everyone for attending, and make sure to stay safe during lockdown.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Everyone. Bye-bye.